So we've had a range of quick fire talks sharing some of the cohort's experience and some of our faculty, and of course Josie, who's such a champion of digital skills in heritage through her programme. They're all here now to answer your questions. We've got some great questions coming into the chat. So we've got until almost the close to have a chat, have a discussion. You can use the Q&A. Remember, you can vote up other people's questions if you'd like to as well. But I'm going to jump straight to a question from Beverly at the Heritage Trust Network. So this is such an issue that absolutely is at the heart of what so many of us are doing. So Beverly says, at the Heritage Trust Network, we're in the middle of a digital transformation. Inclusivity and accessibility is very important to us, and we're just about to undertake a large piece of work on this. How much has accessibility and inclusivity featured in your conversations over the last year? And I wondered if, going to Josie, maybe you'd like to get the ball rolling with that from the perspective of the fund, of the Heritage Fund stance.
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to. It's an absolutely great question. It's something that's very, very dear to my heart, and one of the reasons that I'm interested and involved in technology anyway. So at the National Lottery Heritage Fund, we have a range of strategic commitments, and one of those is well, quite a few of those relate to our commitments around diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we really do think very carefully about how we position that, especially in relation to all aspects of the work we do, but obviously hugely in terms of digital. I thought it was very interesting, unsurprising, but very interesting. There was a report not long ago that evaluated our emergency funding. So this is not specific digital funding, but this is the funds that we've distributed on behalf of governments to the sector during the crisis. The evaluation showed that obviously a high percentage of those funds were spent on infrastructure, software, training, other aspects of digital. That's not such a huge surprise. But also it showed that actually the organisations seized upon the positive opportunities for engaging with and making themselves more accessible to audiences during that lockdown period than they potentially had been before, and that's really exciting. And you know, it's a huge shame that it takes a global pandemic to show us those opportunities, but they are significantly there, and lots of people, especially in, who don't feel confident or comfortable in some heritage settings, you know, are not potentially very, very comfortable and confident online. So, and we know from the kind of statistics in terms of percentages of the population, so just in the UK, sorry for global people I know that are listening, but percentages of people in the UK, we have a very high percentage of people who have access to mobile and computer and internet connected computers. Obviously we do have a digital divide, and that is an issue, but actually there's a very high percentage, it's around high 90s across the spectrum. And we know from that group a much smaller percentage are connecting to heritage, either online or offline. So it represents a massive opportunity for us as a sector. So that's kind of one thing, helping people who don't necessarily see that heritage is for them, or don't necessarily understand the huge benefits that heritage has, connect to it is really important for all of us, I know, in the sector. The other part of it is obviously the accessibility part, and this is about making sure that the digital products that we're pushing out, our websites, our data sets, our resources, are accessible, and that's really, really important to us as an organisation. One of the things that we promote through our grant making is that we have a requirement for outputs to be accessible, and one of the first things that we funded actually during lockdown was a series of guides for the sector that focused on essential pivot items, and on that list was safeguarding. So what do I do in online, those online environments, privacy and security, and accessibility. So, you know, we very, very much put that at the heart of everything we do. The other part of access, obviously, I won't go into because I feel like I could talk for a long time around this, is obviously our open access policy. And that's kind of core to making sure that publicly funded resources and outputs are as usable and as accessible as possible by the public. It's only one small part of an open access policy, but it is an important part that we also require our digital outputs to be openly licensed. So I'll stop there and let others pick up the baton. I'm aware that I've addressed accessibility in many ways there.
That's a fantastically rich answer, Josie, and we will share into the chat and in the follow-up material afterwards resources that we all mention here, so we can share the links to the guides that you mentioned. Anyone else on the panel want to pick up that baton from Josie? Anyone got anything to add? Ross?
I'll put a note in the chat because I was just trying to find a couple of references. One is to another really exciting dimension to thinking about accessibility, inclusion and digital is in the workplace as well. You know, yes, it's what we design and it's the ways in which we design, you know, universally and with accessible principles in mind. And yes, it's about us understanding the role that technology plays in the lives of those of us with impairments and, you know, and disabled people around the world, and how important that is to understand that. But another bit of work that we were doing that on One by One, that's, you know, this is, you know, work that's helped inform some of the you know, the framings that have been used on this program, has been around starting to think about accessibility within the workplace, and to what extent, final sentence, I know I could go on, but final sentence, you know, to what extent are we ensuring that those new digital workplaces that we're putting together, this here, the extent to which these are accessible as well. So it's certainly an area that we're interested in researching further. So please, if you're particularly interested in that, you have expertise in that area, or you'd like to be part of a research project that's thinking hard about that, please do get in contact with me.
Thank you, Ross. I think we'll move on because time is flying. Let's move on to another question. Ian Watson asks what he calls an old chestnut, but it's still one of the things that we get asked a lot about. And Ian says, should organizations have a digital strategy, or should digital not be spun through everything we do? Who'd like to jump in first on that one? Patrick.
I don't know. I just feel remiss if I didn't say something about that. It is an old chestnut. I remember seeing the chief executive of Tesco's kind of speak, and he said, if you've got a digital strategy, you're too late. And I think that having it woven through is the ideal. And a lot of the work that Ross and Anra and colleagues and I have done on digital maturity as an overall idea would indicate that if you can, as I was saying earlier, weave together digital with process, with people, with business models, and indeed weave together digital competencies across teams rather than kind of stovepiped within individual roles or within teams, that would appear to be a wise and mature thing to do. However, there may be some periods or some particular reasons why you have very particular digitally focused roles, or in fact even go back to the old IT as a kind of infrastructural layer of digital. And it may be that you're layering kind of digital on top of an existing business plan, and that's how you have to do it. And it may be that you layer other things on top of an existing business plan. So I'm a great believer in it being integrated. So exactly how the documents fall doesn't really matter. I'm a bit of a skeptic about digital roles and digital teams, I have to say, because I think what COVID has taught us is that people, customers or users or participants or visitors or whatever they are people, and we need to have a consistent interaction with them, whether they're stood in front of us, whether they're in our building or our field or our monument, or whether they're engaging with us on various digital touch points. And that's the core thing of user-centeredness.
Thank you, Patrick. Giovanna.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an analogy here. I've worked in countries where, and this is the analogy, where finance and budgeting is siloed. And in an organization, everybody says, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. So-and-so will worry about it. And things go completely off rails or haywire, or there's overspending, or people are, shall we say, financially illiterate. And you change that model to empower people to understand that they have to control and and work with finance. And the whole organization starts humming in a completely different way. I've had this direct experience now of siloing the digital and taking it, and moving it into the mainstream, and finding, curiously, I'm having sort of deja vu, which is people are starting to feel empowered about decision making. And yes, there have to be specialists. Yes, there have to be tech people, but it's this idea that we are collectively responsible for the output is really interesting. And I'm just wondering how many other how many other activities within the organization this also applies to. So those are just my direct experiences, and I cannot agree more strongly.
Thank you, John. Oh,
sorry,
Josie.
For example, project management. I will say no more.
Josie.
I was just going to, thanks so much for that comment, Giovanna. I was just going to actually bring it back to digital leadership, because in my experience, that kind of level of integration can only happen when there's somebody taking responsibility for the wide, messy domains that make up digital within organisations, because your technical systems are not the same as how you use digital to achieve your outward facing strategy. Your staff development is not the same as other areas, as your comms and marketing department, for example. So there are different domains that make up digital. If you don't have the kind of oversight and vision towards in a leadership position within an organisation, they don't end up getting connected up together. So it's a powerful argument for why you should be having digitally confident people on your boards. You should be having digital confident people in senior leadership positions within your organisation.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we've had a rush of questions into the Q&A, which is fantastic. So I'm going to encourage the attendees to get up voting on some of those. So show us which ones you think are sort of the most vital to answer. I think the one that is following on naturally for me, I think, is from Kelly at Museums Galleries Scotland, who asks for all the panelists, what first step do you recommend taking for any heritage organisations looking to follow a similar digital skills journey as you? That's Christy. Can I come to you?
It looked like Jane was trying to get in. I would say, well, for me, I think the real, I came to it right at the end, but as a leader, thinking about the risk register and linking it back to all the things that as the CEO and as the board, you recognise are the points of risk for your organisation. So whether that be governance, finance, safeguarding, health and safety, and digital is one that we have on there. All of those, when you start looking at those and how do you address those, it all comes back to there being digital solutions. So it almost becomes a case of starting there and working backwards for me. What are the areas of risk for your organisation, and how do you solve them or mitigate them through digital? And then it makes sense.
Thank you, Josie.
I'll be super quick. I love your point about risk. I think it's a really great one. I have a similar point in parallel to yours, which is about your strategy. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve as an organisation, and how can digital help get you there? Digital won't be able to deliver on everything, and it won't be able to deliver everything about what you want to do. But if it's not there, there's something missing, and there will be some way that you can use digital to shore up, to improve, to help you deliver on those strategic objectives. So slightly the reverse. The other thing that I'd say is Dash survey year 2 is coming soon. So that's a great way for organisations that haven't thought at all about these things to get involved, because it's a free service. Everybody in your organisation fills in a very, very short survey. You get feedback and information about your kind of strengths, weaknesses, what your people are thinking, and kind of ideas about how to move forward. So that would be my top tip.
Great. And the Dash survey is a brilliant segue into the resource. Jane, you've got the link, I think, to post, poised to post into the chat of the resource that's come out of this programme. And one of the sections of that resource is all about assessing and understanding the digital skills of your team, and talks about Dash and gives you all the links you need to that. So quick plug for that. Now, a different kind of measuring, assessing, one of our attendees says they would be interested to know more about how the leaders measured success with regards to digital, which we could have a week's worth of webinars on that, but let's attack it. Giovanna, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
I'm going to use the old Chinese proverb, too soon to tell, because I think this is, it's already been hinted at that we're emerging from one set of situations and into another. So we're kind of in new territory, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about, that I've been talking about with our new head of engagement and experience, is the new kind of metrics that we want to put around this coming post-pandemic, and understanding that digital is I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear from, Ross and Patrick and all of you really, what the new digital looks like post-pandemic in a way, if it is new, and what kind of, we want to measure it, we want to understand it in order to work out its future benefits, if you want. So I'd be curious to pass that. I want to pass that on to hear about that.
I mean, if I can quickly say, I can't be the innovation director of a research agency without making a comment. And I put a link earlier, kind of prompted by some of the things Josie said about, say, for instance, there's AHRC COVID emergency fund funded research about the digital changes to cultural audiences across the UK. Now, measuring research, evidence, not assuming that things will be as they were, I think are our best tools here. So that's where research and data comes in. It doesn't necessarily predict how things are going to be, but I think we can see that this idea of kind of bouncing forwards rather than bouncing back, there are some things that are not going to bounce back, and I think we can see that that's not just about digital, although it has massive digital implications. That our working patterns mean that we're going to not commute to big conurbations as much, and we're going to live more. A lot of people are going to live and work from home more permanently. That actually has massive implications for both digital infrastructure and also what those people might want to do culturally on their doorstep, and indeed the digital literacy of those people and what they might expect compared to the audiences that used to be going somewhere. So there are many impacts of COVID on every aspect of our organisation, and digital weaves into those in different ways.
Thank you, Patrick. One of the links that we can share as well is around Culture 24 has been working on a programme called Let's Get Real for many years. We're currently looking with a cohort of 45 organisations at how to measure success online. So thinking about the online experience side of things, and we'll be sharing results from that soon. And then the next one will be looking at hybrid working, which is part of that picture. Giovanna, perhaps going back to your question around what digital will be. It takes us to a question from Oliver Vickers Harris. Hello, Oliver. who says there's clearly been a long overdue pivot to digital in response to the pandemic, with recovery funding, as Patrick just mentioned, replacing capital projects as the oil to grease the wheel. I love the way you phrased that. What confidence does the panel have that this will bring about long-term strategic changes within the sector as opposed to short-term reactive responses? Anyone like to jump in first? Josie, put a hand up quickly.
I'm always up for a strategic question. I think entirely what is going to happen is that for some organisations there is going to be a bounce back. But the bottom line is we live in a historical period where our economy and our societies are very closely linked to digital, and the pandemic hasn't invented the new use for digital. It hasn't changed particularly how people can work or do work. It's accelerated a lot of that behaviour, and it's made some of that behaviour necessary when before it might have been a choice. So for me, the smart kind of leaders in the room will be thinking, well, okay, this has given me somewhat of a super boost, potentially quite a painful one during this period, because it has been rough on a lot of people, but actually the overall picture hasn't changed. We are a digital economy, and you know, we have a huge opportunity to take advantage of positioning UK heritage through the use of digital. So that would be it for me. For some people the tide will go out, but I think for the people that are going to be successful and resilient, it won't. They will push forward.
Chris.
Hi. I think in the early days of the pandemic, I agree. I think there was a sense that we'll go back to how we used to do things, but it's been going on so long now. It feels this has just become embedded in the way that we are. So I feel much more optimistic that this is just how it's going to be, because it's just become life. And it's so long ago now that we did things in the old ways that they feel, they do feel last century. Yeah.
Thank you. We're not going to get to all of these questions, but I can see a couple of people, the panel have started typing answers, and we will follow up. If there are any questions that we have not answered, we will follow up when we send you the links after this with as much as we can. I think we're very nearly at the end. I think we're going to finish with Matthew's question, Matthew of Vocalize, which is a fantastic charity working in accessibility. He says, is it even possible to be an analog leader anymore? Is it possible to be an analog leader anymore?
Well, if I can, not in the 2020s, but we're not digital leaders either. We're leaders of people. We're leaders of organisations, and it's a bit like Giovanna said. You know, you can't not do money. Can't not do money. Can't not do project management. Can't not do health and safety. Can't not do digital. It's fetishizing it is unhelpful. Understanding that it's really, really important in probably most of the things that you do is absolutely essential, I'd say. And of course, there are certain things which are very, very much a digital product or a digital experience or a digital change. But it's the I don't know, the warp and the weft, I think we were trying to say during the course, something like that.
Thank you, Patrick. Ross.
In a sentence, because I know we're at time. Matthew, you are analog and you will stay analog, and we must embrace the humanity of and the being human as a leader, and everything we said about the emotionality and that affective dimension to leadership. So embrace the analog in you.
Giovanna.
Okay. Just very briefly, it's a gradient. It's got to be a gradient. You know, this isn't a binary conversation at all. And I'm finding that that's the whole point of the journeys we've been on, is we're neither one nor the other. I mean, we're both, but we're neither one nor the other. And I really am trying to emphasize to my staff, it's a gradient.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think on that note, we're going to have to leave it there because I've just got a couple of things to tell you about as we close. Thank you so much, everyone who has asked questions. As I say, we'll try to get to them. There's some fantastic questions and comments. Hearing about experiences from Digital Museums Canada from Megan. Thank you, Megan. Questions from Marco Mason around innovation by design. That's another whole webinar in itself, Marco. Nick Winterbotham, Nick Winterbotham, who is one of our partners on Leading the Sector, talking about museums in Wales and that sort of impact around the place-based work is all hugely important, and we will follow up by email with you all.